This program is made possible through support from Savannah Canoe and Kayak, pedal sports outfitter for the Georgia coast. Savannah Canoe and Kayak provides top quality instruction, guided tours, and camping adventures to the barrier islands of the Georgia coast. And the Original Pancake House, a gourmet breakfast and lunch served with a friendly smile, where quality fresh and made from scratch still rule.
Hello, and welcome to Art Talks, Art Matters. I am your host, Jerome Meadows, founder and director of Indigo Sky Community Gallery here in Savannah, Georgia. This monthly show seeks to promote the importance of art in our lives by showcasing local artists and the work they create. Learning about these creative individuals, as well as the curators, gallery directors, collectors, and others involved in this dynamic field, can enhance our understanding and enrich us in countless ways. We will be discussing the work of our guests, and in turn, they will showcase the artwork of a selected member of our community. I would urge you to seek out these individuals and organizations, and of course our sponsors, and support them as best you can. Our guests. Barbara McCullough is a professor and chair of visual effects at the Savannah College of Art and Design here in Savannah, Georgia. She is an independent film and video maker whose goal is to tap the spirit and richness of her community by exposing its magic, touching its textures, and trampling old stereotypes, revealing untold stories reflective of African American life. Her films are exhibited in universities, galleries, museums, and festivals throughout the U.S. and abroad. Currently, she is completing a documentary, Horace Tapscott, Musical Griot, about the musical genius, community activist, and mentor to a generation of accomplished jazz musicians. Kayla Doggin is the editor of the Savannah Art Informer. She is the art beat columnist for Connect Savannah and a freelance writer for Art Place America, a 10-year collaboration among a number of foundations, federal agencies, and financial institutions working to position art and culture as a core sector of comprehensive community planning and development. Kayla is also a founding member of ArtWise Savannah, a nonprofit organization focused on expanding the creative economy in our city. Kayla has a degree in art history from the Savannah College of Art and Design. And so, welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're going to start with you, Kayla.
Okay.
And I'm really excited about having you here. It's the first time we will be discussing and presenting a writer, as opposed to someone who's working in the studio. Mm-hmm. Your art tools are your pens and your laptop, I'm assuming.
Keyword, yes.
Keyword. To give our viewing audience a sense of what goes into writing and how someone gets into that field, what got you interested in the first place?
That's a good question. I was a reluctant writer, actually, at first. It was something that I suppose I had showed talent for when I was younger. Went to school for art history. That involved a lot of writing. And when I left SCAD, when I graduated, I was looking for an outlet. And ArtWise Savannah, which at the time was DeSoto Road Gallery, was looking for writers. Mm-hmm. And it gave me the opportunity to meet a lot of artists in the community and kind of find myself within the community too.
Okay. And how long ago did you graduate?
Oh my gosh, I think it was about 3 years ago.
Okay, very good. So when you were an art major, art history major.
Yes.
What was your focus?
My focus was actually, although SCAD doesn't technically require undergraduate art history majors to declare a focus, my focus was always in my interest with post-World War II art, so art after 1945, and specifically performance art.
Yeah, I was intrigued when I learned that performance art being what? Just briefly, how would you define performance art?
Performance art is any action or happening that is created or undertaken with some kind of intention, either the intention to express or the intention to provoke. Either way, I think works.
Okay, interesting. So that is a wide field.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many different incarnations and definitions of performance art. One of the big ones that everyone might be familiar with is feminist performance art,
Yes.
which kind of unlocked a lot of abilities for women artists in the 60s and 70s.
Okay. All right, well, getting back to your writing,
Mm-hmm.
I know in conversations you've expressed an opposition to categorizing art by the usual standards, abstract art or whatever some of those titles might be. Tell us a little bit about why you feel that way.
Well, to be clear, when you're dealing with academic writing, it's a totally different animal. In that instance, you would want to have some categorization because you're dealing with academics. But when you're writing for a broader audience, maybe people who aren't, reading art critique all the time, or that's not really their thing, what's more helpful to get people into that and to kind of awaken their interest in art and artists is to apply a broader scope and to focus more on the narrative. And I think when you tell someone, you enter the gallery and there's 5 incredible abstract expressionist artworks, people are automatically like, I don't know what that means, this is not for me, and it can be a turnoff.
A turnoff, sure.
So I think the key really is when you're writing about or even talking about art is to more so focus on how people can relate to it and what the story is.
Yeah, which is very much what this program seeks to do. So,
Right.
Wonderful answer.
Thank you.
Okay, but we are talking about critique. And I had raised a question the other day, the difference between critique and review. If you can sort of expound upon that somewhat.
Sure. Well, I think maybe first it'd be helpful to kind of define those two terms. A review is more so saying, this happened, here's kind of an overview of what happened. If you're talking about an art show, just saying this is what was shown. Maybe not necessarily talking so much about your opinion or looking with a critical eye.
Okay.
And when you're talking about criticism, that has much more of a focus on really looking at the work and discussing what you see there, what you find there emotionally, what you're responding to. And I think there's a negative connotation that comes along with that term, critique. And I think that scares people. But critique is really much more grounded in sussing out these details in a work of art and figuring out how you connect to it, what the context is, and even if you don't like a work, is it successful or not? If the work is trying to engage, in a way that appeals to, you being disgusted by it.
Well, that's its intent.
Right. I mean, some work does do that, and I think that those emotions are valuable, and talking about that isn't necessarily a bad critique.
Okay. Huh. Very interesting. And to use the word negative, you've gotten some negative responses to some of your articles. What's that about?
I think that anybody that writes and publishes work online is going to experience that.
Okay.
And most of the negative responses I've gotten have been to cultural criticism pieces that I've written, not necessarily art criticism.
So these weren't artists who felt that you badmouthed them?
No, and I that's not what I'm about. I'm not about badmouthing anybody. Okay. But I, obviously have opinions, and opinions are important, and opinions are what pays writers' bills. So, I think if you're not getting responses that are strong either way, then maybe you should look at your writing.
Oh, okay. So you want that kind of reaction?
I don't want to provoke, but I think that that knowing that people are responding to what you're writing is encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
And it also means that you're getting through to people in some way, that what you're writing isn't just, they get through 2 paragraphs of it and on to the next thing.
Yeah.
You have to
Well,
be able to
it's interesting
capture.
because, a lot of artists express the same wish, that at least you get some kind of reaction as opposed to the work coming across as being invisible.
Yeah.
But with that said, looking at it from the point of view of the artist or the person who's being reviewed or critiqued, there is a certain vulnerability there, yes.
Absolutely. I come from an art school background, so, even though I'm not a visual artist myself, I have had that experience of sitting in a class and having people critique my work, and I'm a terrible artist, so so I understand what it's like to create something and have people look at it very critically and be afraid of what they might say or if they're judging you based on your work. And I've also been on the other end, which is critiquing the work of my peers who I know, have put their hearts and souls into these things, and coming at it from a place of respect for their process and for what they might be trying to express, I think is really important.
So you are very well suited for what you do.
I hope so.
Barbara, did you want to add anything to that conversation?
No, the one thing that you mentioned in terms of, art process, okay, that's one of the things I think I'm really interested in terms of understanding from the perspective of the project that we're going to take a look at of mine later. It's examination of, why do you do what you do? What is the background that, puts you in a position to basically, speak to your art in the way in which you do. In this particular case, as a musician, named Horace Tapscott. Okay, now, but also, that's my work, but also, too, taking a look at Michael Betancourt's work.
Sure.
Process is very much, involved with, the way that he approaches, but at the same time, too, he's looking at the theoretical perspective that he has, expounded in terms of his writings, okay? So he speaks to theory, but then again, he demonstrates.
We will
by
get to
his
that.
work.
We will get to that.
Sure. Okay.
But I'm intrigued by the idea of process. Do you focus on process when you're doing your critiques, or is it, here's the end product and this is what I get from that?
I always try to ask about the process, because I think that that's really important for contextualizing the work and understanding where the artist is coming from. And also people want to read about it. That's usually the first question people have, especially if you're not coming from the art world, is how is this made? Some things are kind of incredible when you think about them as art objects. I mean, a bronze sculpture, how is that made?
How is it made?
Yeah.
Why did you do it?
And why did you do it? Obviously, yeah.
Well, that's a perfect segue for us to introduce your showcase artist.
Yes.
So, who is he?
Okay.
And how does he do what he does?
This is Ben Jollefson. He is a painter, specifically an oil painter. He lives in Savannah, Georgia, obviously. And he was once a partner at Nonfiction Gallery. People might be familiar with that space. And he's exhibited several times so far. He's had 2 solo exhibitions. And you can see some of his work in this image. That's him jumping up and kind of showing a little bit of his personality.
And the shadow is not painted. That's actually his shadow.
Yes, the shadow is real, but the wall is painted. And this is something that he does that I think is really interesting. He is all about kind of looking at space and environment, and how 2-dimensional works can be brought into a 3-dimensional space as more than just an art object, but as a piece of this world.
Well, let's see the next image.
So one thing we should probably say off the bat is that Ben's titles are not
Available. Or
and
do they exist even?
and for some people, I think they look to the title as like a guide to
Yes.
figure out a work. So the fact that we don't have that is a little interesting. It makes his work challenging in a way that is valuable, I think. So one thing to maybe look at here, he's kind of using some highlight and some shadow to create depth with this image. And it also functions to make almost like a trompe l'oeil space, where this looks three-dimensional, but again, you're dealing with something that's actually two-dimensional.
So this is a painting on a flat surface?
Yes, this is a oil painting, which is actually incredible because if you were able to get close to this, you'd see that there are no brush strokes at all. And this is a huge painting, by the way.
Okay.
What size?
I think it's about 5.5 feet tall, maybe 6 feet even.
So next one?
So this image it kind of shows, again, him painting the space. And you can sort of see here with the hearts, they're kind of blended into this shadow of the other painting that kind of draws your eye directly into it, I think. And the hearts are almost tongue-in-cheek.
How do you mean? The way they're done, or?
Just the fact that there's hearts all over the wall, I think.
Oh, okay.
He's definitely got a sense of humor with his works.
They look like windows into his world.
Definitely, very much so. I think the colors are unique to him. He's definitely not afraid of vibrant color. He feels no need to tone it down, and I kind of love that about him and his work.
Well, before we go on to the next one, you're indicating that he uses oil for his canvases. He's not using oil paint on these walls.
No, no, that would take so long. That's maybe a thing to point out for people who may not know is
Sure.
oil paint takes a really long time to dry.
Exactly.
And he's dealing with subject matter. His kind of idea behind it is a metaphor for, he's dealing with the fast-paced world that we live in today, and he's responding to that with a really slow medium, which is oil paint. So that might help to kind of understand where he's heading with his metaphors. But no, the paint on the wall, I think, is either acrylic or just wall paint.
House paint. All right, next.
So this is an image that you could see in the previous one, but this is a little bit more close up. And this maybe introduces some of his collage elements.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of the few artists that I've seen to introduce collage in such a flat medium, but he's still creating depth.
Yes.
So there's a nice juxtaposition there, and this also introduces a little bit of his figure work, which is very empty and cold and lifeless, but he does have the ability to create these very realistic looking figures.
You mentioned collage.
Yes.
You're using that term for this painting.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's actually layering other elements onto the canvas. Is that the case? Because that's typically what collage would be.
Right. It's not a literal collage. It's more of a conceptual collage.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to make that distinction. Yeah. Okay, next one.
I love this piece so much.
Okay.
I'll be interested to hear how you guys feel about it too. But again, saying what I was saying earlier about these kind of lifeless figures, he does have a quote from his artist statement that maybe would help, that I'd like to introduce. He says, "I'm concerned with what is real in a society in persistent flux, one in which we are increasingly confronted with an excess of simulacra rather than sincere experience," and simulacra being objects that are representative of a thing rather than the thing itself.
And let's hear the word again.
Simulacra.
Simulacra.
Yes. Very interesting concept.
So what are the figures then?
These figures are almost representative of like a shell of a person to me.
Yeah, because the eyes are empty. You know, the back of the skull is missing.
Yeah, that's a thing that he does a lot, actually.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. There's another one that we'll see in a minute that has a similar like lack of the back of the head, and maybe that has something to do with some kind of psychology. I mean, there's no brain present. There's no eye.
But at the same time, it's like it's two forms that look like they are connected in some way.
Yes.
But yet, because there is no, there's no emotion by way of the eyes, and there's no complete form, but at the same time, they look like they're merged.
Yes, or in an embrace, which I think is interesting because there is no emotion, but it's such an emotional pose.
And then you have the color, the vibrancy of
Yes.
the color. around it.
And not just the colors, but the fact that those are flowers, those are living things in bloom.
Right.
Which a lot of times sort of relates to, love and emotion, or expression of emotion of some, usually, love or affection or affinity or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go into the next one. And here again, we have
Yes.
where's the back of his head?
Exactly. So Ben pulls some of his inspiration from fashion editorials, and you can kind of see that a little bit more here. This is the first figure we've seen that actually has a real face and a real body. But the pose is so unnatural, and the way that the figure is kind of blending into the sky, you kind of lose this line of demarcation here along the figure's body, and that face is very creepy in a way that makes me want to look at it more.
Well, it seems delightful. It seems happy. It doesn't seem to be suggesting of missing the back of its head. For
Well,
example.
mindless? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. This may be a simplification, but it almost kind of has that feel of like a 50s celebration of consumerism, that really happy face, like, oh, I can't wait to just buy something.
Interesting. Okay.
And knowing that his inspiration comes from magazines,
Mm.
that connection seems to be, a valuable one to me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, shall we go forward?
So various people had some interesting interpretations of this one. Did you want to talk a little bit about what you saw in this?
Yeah, what I saw when I'm looking at it is I thought of, for example, the bottom portion, of the painting has this sort of iridescent, leather-looking, fabric, and that's kind of like what I saw. I didn't see anything that had to do with a physical form necessarily, I just saw this, more of that with a sort of a tongue-in-cheek representation of the flower form, okay? Which in a way is sort of like, why is that there? But at the same time, I did not I did not see any of this as any kind of relationship to a physical form.
Well, it certainly begs the question as to why any of this is there. And not only in terms of what these objects or forms might be, but then what do they have to do with one another? And then for me, spatially, the idea that you mentioned of the conceptual collage, there's aspects of this that are just intentionally very flat.
Yes.
In contrast to what is rendered as having three-dimensionality and spatial relationship. So there's a confusion about it and uncertainty about it, which, and short of having a title, we're left to decide if we want to delve into that and what we might find of our own personal interpretations, which is art.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think
Exactly.
earlier on when we were discussing this, basically, there was a lot of interpretation that went on, and a lot of recognition of, in terms of, like I said, I didn't see any physical forms, but but then again, too, at the top of it, I see this heart. And I'm trying to figure out does that relate to the hearts that were, in the previous, paintings that were shown, or was that even a heart in his, in terms of how he conceptualized the piece?
No, that's actually a really great point. I didn't make that connection between that and the wall painting. But to me, my instant reaction was, it's a pile of body parts. So it was really interesting to hear that wasn't the automatic assumption.
Yeah.
As you said, everybody sees it a little differently.
So let's see what we can find in the next one.
Again, a little bit of a different representation of what we saw earlier in the previous work. But still with that strong collage element.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I still see body parts, but
Really?
I do. But maybe that's because that's what I want to see. I enjoy these because there's this very strange abstraction to them. Ben doesn't like to use the word surreal when he's talking about his works, but I think and I don't want to use the word if he doesn't want to use it, but I have to say they're surreal to me in the sense that they kind of beg for interpretation. There's almost a Rorschach element to this. And what does it say about me that I see bodies? What does it say about Barbara that she doesn't?
And I don't, I don't
Yeah.
see bodies. I see, I see things related to fabric.
Mhm.
Okay, because of maybe the folds at the the top
Yes.
section of it. I see those folds, but then again, maybe it is referencing body parts. And if you take a look at that other part that has that crease,
Mhm.
that longer part underneath it, I can't reference that with anything else that I'm aware of. But at the same time, because of the smoothness of the texture and the folds that I'm seeing, at the top, form, it just reminds me of some sort of fabric or textile.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's look at a few more of his.
This piece
It's very different.
is very different, and I should say that this piece, when it's displayed in person, what you're looking at here is the whole picture field.
Okay.
This is the whole canvas, and this isn't a
So
large
it hasn't
work.
been cropped. This
No, this is the whole canvas. It's about 18 by 24, so
It's small.
Oh.
it's about that big. But when this is displayed, the wall around it is painted with these this pinstripe pattern coming
Oh.
off of it.
Mm.
So when you see it in person, there's again that trompe l'oeil effect where you're not sure where the painting ends and where the wall begins.
Okay.
And of course, he has this amazing shadow that kind of falls on top of it, which I think is one of his most successful collages.
I'm still thinking about windows.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
windows into his world with windows.
Hmm.
Well, this idea of extending the painting onto the walls that it occupies is quite intriguing.
It really is. I've never seen anyone do that before.
Which means that if you were so enamored of this that you decided to buy it and take it home, he would come with it.
With the wall.
And the
The
rest
wall.
of your living space would end up being part of the work, which is rather intriguing,
Yeah, that's a good point.
I would think.
I mean, if I bought it, that's what I would expect.
Exactly. Okay, do we have a couple more?
Okay, so this I should introduce by saying that for a while he was doing this skywriting motif. Skywriting being exactly what you think of it as when a plane goes up in the sky and someone pays them to write a message. And he was experimenting with this a little bit as almost a tongue-in-cheek way of self-criticism in his previous show. The show was called The Distance That Separates One Person's Heart from Another. He had a work that had a piece of skywriting in it, and that was the piece that was nearest in the middle of all the hearts. And the skywriting said, things are getting sentimental.
Okay.
So he's kind of playing with that here again, I think.
Do you know what the size of this piece is?
This is small as well.
Okay.
He hasn't been working large lately. The last couple ones that we've seen have been recent works, and they're, I think, 18 by 24 as well. So again, here you're looking at the whole picture field.
Excellent. Wow, and is there another in the minute we have left? Yes. Now,
Some
talk
more.
about collage.
Yeah, exactly. Very graphic.
But this is all painted. None of this is
yes.
cut out from magazines or this is all
No,
painted.
100% painted. I think it really shows his versatility and more of the shadows that I love. It really does look like there's a tree somewhere over
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I thought that these were not painted. I thought they, they were cutouts from something else, except for the background maybe and the forms that remind you of a butterfly and a cloud. I thought the rest was actually cut out.
No, he's just that skilled. He's a pretty tremendous figure painter.
All right, well, fantastic. Thanks for bringing Ben's work in here.
My pleasure.
This is quite a revelation. So any given day, you're walking down the street, you're passing this guy.
Yeah, he's out there.
Who knew? Okay, fantastic. We're going to now shift to Barbara. Something very different in terms of an art form. Again, as an independent filmmaker, documentarian. So, this is Barbara McCullough's video.
Okay, would you like me to talk about it, or you just want to take a look at it?
We're going to run the first clip first.
Okay.
we have something that people want all over the world.
Yeah.
So when we recognize it and we treat it like it, then of course we will be that giant that we are and be recognized as that giant. I'm Horace Tapscott from Houston, Texas. I started playing the piano at about 6 years old. And in those days, playing the piano or playing violin in the kind of neighborhood I lived in at that time meant that I couldn't walk down the streets with a violin in my hand or be playing the piano. The music was, always around us. You had blues people coming around my home like Floyd Dixon, Amos Milburn. They lived in the neighborhood. The music was always there. In my house, if you didn't play an instrument, you were almost a stepchild or something. We had a shotgun house straight through there. And at the door was a giant piano. For me to get outside of my house to go play with the rest of the people in the street, I'd have to cross the piano or the trombone. And at the door would be my mom waiting, sewing. So I haven't heard any music here today. My day isn't complete yet. Are you going to ruin my day?
Very intriguing. So give us some idea of how you came to select Horace Tapscott as a subject of your.
One of the things that I have to mention is that I am the daughter of a musician, and I am the niece of 4 or 5 musicians. And so music has always been surrounding me in my life. And so with Horace, it was really interesting because there are all these people, I come from the Los Angeles area, which is where this project was originated. And all these people knew of him, and nobody had actually done a project on him. And he was blacklisted in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s. And when his music came out, the radio stations would not play it. But the thing that's so interesting is that his background goes back to his influences of his family. And my background speaks to the influence of my family, because I was always surrounded by music. Music was played in our house. Music was played, my father was a musician, so he had bands basically that he was practicing down in our basement. So at the same time, I want to understand, who is this person? How did he have such a great impact on so many young musicians in Los Angeles? Why was he blacklisted? Because he was he was a community activist, but it was something that was almost imposed upon him because of the fact that his political affiliations. And at the same time, it was like, I want to know more about him. And that's how I started the project.
Excellent. So you had heard of him from his activism and his musical.
I've heard of him because he would play free in the parks.
Okay.
And so that's how I became interested in him, because, and then he had an aneurysm, okay?
Oh my God.
He had an aneurysm, and people thought that he was, going to pass away, and I'm going like, another musician, another contributing cultural, figure who's going to die before anybody knows anything about him. Mm-hmm. And that's why I wanted to do the project on Horace.
Okay, very good. All right, so if we can see the next clip.
She spent most of her life playing music. In the early 20s and the 30s, she had somewhat of a jazz trio at that time. And she played she played tuba as well, and she played it in 2 orchestras. The church that we went to had 2 large bands, one on this side, one on that side. My mother played in both of the bands. The more I got into the kind of music that I got into, the more she supported me. The fact was that she was very interested in seeing me grow into wanting to play music to the point where that I put most of my time in it. And she was very happy when she'd come to concerts to hear me, do my performances, some of my original music. And she was encouraging the kind of music. She called it strange and funny, but it was music, as far as it was coming out of me, and she appreciated that. And she still had the same kinds of feelings about the music. Music to her was very important. He was very important to her and her family. But I didn't have the intense feeling for it until we moved to Los Angeles, from Houston, Texas, about 1944.
I've got to say, the fact that she played in two bands and played the tuba.
She was a serious musician. I mean, she was a very serious musician. And that had to do with, how serious he became about the music.
Absolutely.
Because he didn't, like you said, he came to Los Angeles, basically, he really had to go and meet his music teachers before he came to, the place where he was going to live. Mm-hmm. And the fact that, his mother really wanted him to have the best musical background he could possibly get. And he didn't see that in the beginning. But eventually he did. He saw how important it was, and it was the only thing that he really wanted to do. And it was the thing that he really did well. So, most of the pieces that, I included in the project are all pieces that he composed himself. Mm-hmm.
But again, getting back to your inspiration to do this of him, although you were not compelled to become a musician, you still had that.
They gave up on me. They thought, nope, not her.
But you still had that influence, that energy was something that you lived with. So that would be sort of an affinity that you had with Horace.
I had a very great affinity for music and musicians, and wanted to understand how they were able to, compose and create something that was emotionally satisfying when I listened to them, and also motivated in other ways, because I always thought of music as the first art, which I'm sure people will dispute that. But anyway, that's my sensibilities say that music is the first art, because that was the one that really influenced me, emotionally and in other ways. So, hearing Horace's story, as I, learned who he was and how he created his music and who his influences were and who were the people around him who also, respected him, it became even more important for me to do a project on him. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's the physicality involved, the intellect that's involved, the creative spirit that's involved, the whole sensibilities of how someone hears, and then interprets, and then puts it out for other people to appreciate. Okay.
Well, that's perfect, because it leads to the next clip, which is get an opportunity to see and hear Horace playing his instrument. So that, for me, raises the perplexing, intriguing question of the relationship between you as a filmmaker, and that's a creative form, and you're documenting an artist, in this case a musician. Do you see this as a collaboration of sorts?
Well, it is a collaboration of sorts, but at the same time, too, when I look at what he's done, I'm still imposing, my sensibilities on, in terms of selections that I make, okay? How I tell the story, how I put together the pieces that he's provided me in terms of, the interviews that I've done with him, in terms, with the musical pieces, basically, I don't cut them out, but in terms of really revealing who he was, I thought it was necessary for me, can't include all the dialogue that he gives me, but there's certain things that I think that are really more iconic, iconic who he is, and that had to do with his whole affinity for the community and his activism.
Well, but in this case, I'm looking at the artistry of it. I mean, here he is, with his instrument, and we talked earlier previously about his hands. That that's his means of expression vis-a-vis that instrument.
And that's why I think I wanted to show that photo montage.
Yes.
Because of you have the motion blur of him moving across the piano keys.
Right.
Okay, and his hands are so important to basically getting across what his skill is, his talent is. And so it was like isolating that, isolating the movement of his hands, so you can really get a sense of, you hear this in the background, but then here you see his hands, and his hands become like the art object. His hands, as they're moving across the piano keys, it's like, oh, look at this, And I was really happy that I was able to get the photographs that were, taken through the process of shooting this particular section. And then it's like, oh, I discovered, oh, this is a treasure trove of imageries that I really have to use, and in the process of doing this film, because it's, again, his hands.
Yeah. And so where you place the camera is part of the artistry that you bring to the process.
Now, I didn't, my photographer shot this for me, okay?
Those still shots?
No, they're still shots. And my photographer, who's also my editor, he shot these for me.
Okay.
And so later on when we were talking about different photographs that we use for the film, and then he showed me these, I'm going like, we have got to use these, But what I needed to do was take a look. There were so many. I could take a look. What would be the most effective way to show, what it was that Horace was doing with his hands as he played, and then how can I create, a rhythm or something that's going to be, emblematic of what it was that he was doing. So it was a pleasure exercise going to take a look at these photographs, and then it became a dilemma because there were so many of them. What am I going to choose that's going to be the best thing to show, his hands in action?
Yeah. Well, I think we have time for one more clip, and then we can discuss that some more.
Raised in a segregated society, my thoughts were all uniform and set for me. If I thought different, then I was what you call an outcast. Either or. I just thought different. I thought I was just as well as the other person. I thought the other person could do just as well as I. I was brought up to believe in the person. And then you have all these things thrown at you because it don't have anything to do with you being a person. It has to do with what color you were. I think the political things come along a little later because in the 50s, that's when the African American was started questioning a lot of things that had been happening previously, and he couldn't be heard in a lot of ways. And the only thing that did come through every now and then was a little music. I believe the politics had already been in the music, but it took on another force.
More articulate.
In the 50s, yeah. Much more.
So here you have a subject who's referencing the 50s, and here we are in 2016, and certain issues have come back.
They haven't changed.
Not that they ever went away. So it's got this timeliness with respect to that. But what fascinates me about this is the idea that the politics is in the music. If you could talk about that relationship, the interplay between, political issues and cultural means of speaking about them.
If you think about the music that he plays, which is jazz, and he plays it the avant-garde jazz, and basically it has a lot of energy involved in it, and basically it's reflective of his environment. I mean,
yes.
and particularly the music from the era that came from the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, music that a lot of people have not been exposed to because it didn't quite fit the mold, for folks thought the music should be. So, you know, you have a lot of really, you know, important players, and Horace included, because he was, you know, he was blacklisted, and he couldn't, you know, his music wasn't played on the radio, and it wasn't also sold in stores. Now, if you want to buy one of his CDs, you know, or one of his albums, it's an incredible amount of money you have to pay to get it. But at the same time, you know, he is reflective in terms of his music of what was going on at the time in which he was at his creative height. Okay, and so you could not separate the artist from the community. Okay, the artist was a part of the community, and the music was reflective of what was going on. So there was struggle, there was you know, conflict, and you know, there was a lot of very intense energy. And so that's what he gives when he plays. You know, it's a social context. I call him like a culture bear. Okay, people of his ilk, I call them like culture bearers. They're the people who basically give us the information intuitively sometimes, but give us the information about who we are in a very subliminal way. It's through the rhythms that they give us and through the energy that they, you know, pass on to us. And so they wind up being the culture bearers, basically, that go from one generation to the next and expose us to what we need to know about who we are within the context of whatever society we're a part of.
And it's the documentarian who then brings that story to the rest of us. Fantastic. We're going to now shift to something very different in terms of an art form. Again, as an independent filmmaker, documentarian, who have you brought in?
Okay, I've chosen to bring in Michael Betancourt. Okay, and Michael is he's an artist, he's a writer, he's a theoretician, okay, and he's a scholar. He's written several books, and he's in articles. And basically what Michael deals with is the idea of creating films that reflect his theory, but at the same time basically, you know, delve in the idea of space and time distortion. And he does this by way of layering a lot of images on top of each other, which could be, you know, sequences, or it could be anything taken from, let's say, an historical film, or something that he's found on the internet that he will then incorporate with, you know, his own ideas, his own concepts, which could be anything from computer graphics to some camera work he's done to just, you know, editing and having a lot of images basically on top of each other, to the point of, you know, there's like, it seems almost like there's hundreds of layers of imagery, you know, compacted on top of each other in order to create a single image, or to create a piece. And his pieces could be anywhere from, well, I think his most recent piece is longer, which is like 15 minutes. So most of the pieces that we're looking at this evening will be things that are somewhere from, let's say, 1:45 seconds, 1:30 seconds, or 3 minutes, which we'll be probably looking at just segments of let's say, the 3-minute piece. But all of them that we're going to look at are really different. Okay. Each piece we're going to look at are really different. This piece we're starting off with is called Coming and Going. And essentially what this is his chronicling like a day going in and out of his home. And so you have the condensed, a kind of condensing of all this time, so broken down into like one piece that instead of being hours long winds up being like a 1:30 seconds. Mm-hmm. And so it's times when you look at him going through the door, it's like he's meeting himself as he goes in and goes out. Okay, so you see his form, you know, entering and leaving, and then you have all the other activity going on around this porch where he's entering. So you have like the birds, and you have, you know, another figure. You know, we haven't quite come to it yet, but there'll be like a cat on the porch. So it's condensing time, and at the same time it's like, oh, okay. And because that's so much a part of his work, is condensing time and displacement of time, and giving another kind of spatial perspective in terms of what goes on in the course of a day, which is all brought down to a little over a minute.
Okay, well, let's go to the next one.
Okay, this one is called Fire Displays. And this particular piece, he has looped his taping or his recording of a fire And he's looped it with several different layers, the editing layers of this one fire experience. And so what he's done is that in the process of doing that, he gives you this blown out area, okay, which is that white light. And then you get all the, the orange and the yellow. And what I'm drawn to this is because of the fact you have so many vibrant colors happening. And you have so much movement happening. So there's no music, but at the same time there's a rhythm happening here.
Yeah.
Okay? So you see, sections changing, and then they go back to something that's familiar.
Yeah, and I think we should stress the fact that both this clip and the previous one have no sound
No,
associated.
they don't have any sound at all.
Others that we will show do have sound, but these two don't.
And it's a whole interesting thing that can happen when you have no sound, but you have images that are moving.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an internal rhythm that happens. And at the same time, it's like Michael's work, I feel would be best shown if it's projected, in a large space, so that you can really, see everything that's going on. Because if I look at the left portion of the, of the frame and the screen, and I look at the right portion of the screen, there's some things that are similar, but yet they're different. And to really take it all in, it's
There's
like
a lot of nuance in there.
oh yeah,
Subtlety.
and you take a look over on the left side,
Mhm.
of the screen, it's like something totally and completely different. But then again, something evades from the right side, of the screen, and then it looks like there's a unity there. Okay, so even though there's a lot of play with movement, there's unity.
Yes. Yeah. Did you want to make any comments on this one, Kayla?
I was just thinking maybe we should talk a little bit about the glitch element here, and how he's actually creating this rhythm with something that maybe shouldn't necessarily
Well,
exist.
to me, basically, the glitch. There's another piece that's called glitch movie.
Mhm.
Okay, and the glitch idea basically is something that could be considered as either a mistake or another way of looking at something.
Mhm.
And I think he really embraces that in the work that he does. He gives you another perspective of something. For example, a fireplace, something that's very ordinary. But in the way in which he presents it, it ends up being something that's an explosion of color, and and also to he captures the rhythm, I think, that a fire gives. So maybe that's why he's calling it fire displace. But at the same time, it's not a mistake. It's just another way of looking, at something.
Well, to use your reference to glitch, we do have a piece that's called Glitch Dance. is
Glitch
it?
Dance. Uh-huh.
Yeah, let's take a look at that one.
Now this has electronic music. Well, there's a reveal that we're not seeing right now, but there is a reveal of an actual physical form. He
Right,
dances
sort of
serpentine.
unglitches the.
It's a piece of film that was taken from an 1896 film piece, okay, an historical piece. And then what he did is he reimagined it, in terms of bringing it to the context of contemporary, technology. So you have this filmic piece from a long time ago, and then he's bringing it into a contemporary context. And it was kind of hard at one point, to see exactly what this image was, and it's looks like when we were looking at it, it reminded me of a butterfly moving.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
I keep seeing a flower blooming.
Yeah, but exactly at the end of it, though, you see the full reveal of a physical form, and it winds up being okay. And at the reveal, it's the black and white, piece of film, which is something that we didn't exactly think we were going to see when we started looking at the piece as when we went into the excerpt. So it's really kind of interesting how he would think of something that was way back historically in 1896, and he's going to grab that and then revision that and put it into a contemporary context.
Okay, I would like to get one more of his in. Well, if you could just say a few words about that piece, which is quite fascinating.
Yeah, but this piece is called Bright Colors, what is it called? It's called False Colors Brightly Seen. Okay, and it's really a very, very interesting and I think beautiful piece because of the colors he's using in it and the fact that it looks like it's breathing. Mm-hmm. It looks like the whole piece is just like there's sections of it you want to take a look at and isolate, but you can't because it's moved on to another movement. And
it's such subtle movement too.
It's very subtle movement, and it goes from left to right. So this is one reason why I think his pieces would be, best shown in a large space, projected from the ceiling, and wall, and the floor. So you can really take in, all these different sections that he has to really see what's going on. Now, this is an example of a piece that is multi-layered. Okay. Which takes time to not only create, but also time to process in terms of, rendering on a computer to actually do. Right. So he uses several different, programs in order to do it, to do this. But at the same time, it's so vivid, and it also takes on a life of its own because of all the movement, the subtle movement.
Okay, we're going to have to move along.
Okay.
We could talk about that forever, though.
We could, indeed.
It's beautiful.
Okay. This brings to a close this episode, and I do want to thank both of you for bringing such wonderful art and perceptions and understandings to our viewing audience. So, Kayla, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Barbara, thank you.
Well, thank you, and I'm glad to meet you.
Yes, me too. It's wonderful.
And thank you all for watching.
This program is made possible through support from Savannah Canoe and Kayak, pedal sports outfitter for the Georgia coast. Savannah Canoe and Kayak provides top quality instruction, guided tours, and camping adventures to the barrier islands of the Georgia coast. And the Original Pancake House, a gourmet breakfast and lunch served with a friendly smile, where quality fresh and made from scratch still rule.